The scroll gives you an opportunity to look beyond the lips of the prophet into the heart and the fears and the feet of the prophet. And I think it's very, very important that we do that, because when we understand who a person is, then we can balance what they say against where they came from, how they feel, and who they really are. Sometimes our greatest messages are never in our lips. It's in our struggle, it's in our pain, it's in our problems. Our human fallacies is what connects us to people. And I think the opportunity to let people know that you're just a guy like anybody else, a person with issues and kids and crises and stresses just like them. It is our similarity to them that makes us relative to them. I don't want to be their hero. I want to be one from among them, because that's who I am.
When I was about 21, and I'm 42 now, I was a student at Morehouse. It was the summer after my junior year. And I was getting opportunities to speak. I was a preacher then, and opportunities to preach and speak. And you know, at 21, the maturity level wasn't that high. And so I was full of myself and thought that, I was the center of everything around me. My grandmother invited me to a revival at the church I grew up in as a little boy. And I went there to hear the service. And the whole time the preacher was preaching, in my arrogance, I'm listening to the preacher, but in my mind, I'm thinking how ineffective this sermon was, or how it wasn't that homiletically sound, or it wasn't theologically or biblically sound. And the whole time he's preaching, I'm missing the sermon, thinking about what I would do or how I would preach it. So I was very arrogant and judgmental at the same time. I left the service that night, and and I got to my grandmother's house, and she asked me, she said, "So what did you think?" Because she was excited, she enjoyed the service. And I remember, I'm almost embarrassed to say, because it was terrible. But at the time, she said, "What did you think of the sermon?" And I told my grandmother, I said, "It was okay. I think I could have done better." I couldn't believe it. And she looked at me funny. I thought there was nothing wrong with what I said. She looked at me funny, and I left her house. Got to the top of the block, made a right turn to go to the main road. As I'm moving towards the main road, I'm doing maybe about 35, 40 miles an hour. As I'm doing that, a dog shot in front of the car. I swerved to avoid the dog. I go to hit the brakes, I hit the gas, end up hitting a tree and going through the windshield. Immediately after that, I woke up in the ambulance, and they were calling my name, and they took a syringe and were using the syringe to press my hand up my arm, asking me, can I feel it? And I couldn't. I started crying because I thought I was paralyzed, because I couldn't feel anything, and I couldn't open my mouth at the time. And so we get to the hospital, and as I'm there, my family's there pouring. I'm in the emergency room in the triage area, and my father, my mother, and my grandmother, and aunt, uncle came in, and they're all crying. Now I can't feel anything, but I'm seeing them. And in my mind, I said, now I don't feel anything. Everybody in here around me is crying. I said, I must be dying in my mind. And I wasn't. They gave me some kind of sedative, and I slept. I woke up pretty much the next morning and found out that, of course, I had a concussion. I had damaged some ribs because I came across the steering wheel. But more than that, I had no scratches on my face, not one scratch. Now, some people could hear me say this and say, "Oh man, that's a miracle that you went through a windshield and you had no scratches, no marks." I was damaged though. The reason why I could not talk is because I hit that windshield mouth first and broke all the bones in my mouth. So I had my mouth wired. I'm in that hospital, the doctor explained everything to me. I started crying. My father brought me a Bible, this little Bible I bought to go preach with. and this old Cokesbury hymnal. So he brings me the hymnal, and I'm saying, to God, now, Lord, I'm gonna open up this hymnal, and whatever I open it up to, this is what you're trying to tell me. I opened up the hymnal, and the song was "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah." Guide me, O Thou Great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but Thou art mighty. Hold me with Thy powerful hand. Then the chorus, bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. And I heard God speaking to my spirit. I think maybe one of the few times in those days I thought I really heard God. And what I heard was, I've given you a gift, and I will take it right back. And the arrogant 21-year-old who was preaching here and there and speaking here and there for that summer could not speak anywhere. And my mouth was shut. And I learned at that moment that when you serve God in this capacity, when you do this kind of work, there ought to be some inherent mechanisms for humility. Because the worst thing you want to happen is to have situations created that humble you. Because those humbling situations are not always painless. In my case, it was painful.
I think as I travel, and I travel a lot, and I see the conditions of our people and our communities, urban and rural, and the drugs and the teenage pregnancy and the falling into violence and decadent behavior. And then I see a church, some urban areas, 2 or 3 churches are blocked. The question is, what is the mission of the church? And before we can unite, we have to have a united mission. And part of the problem is that some of us are so heavenly bound, we're not earthly good. And I have always felt that our job is on earth to get to heaven. Heaven don't need you to save it. Earth does. And I think the confusion is a lot of people are preparing us to die rather than preparing us to live. If we can get the church to unite on the fact that our assignment is to make people better here before the afterlife, then I think we can get past some of these divisions. But we argue mostly about how we're going to live after this life rather than how we're going to live during this life. So we're arguing about, are we really going to this heaven or that, or are you going to do this? When are we going to discuss how we're going to deal with here? There's everybody in the Bible that's there is there because of what they did in the time they lived. The question is, what will they say in history about what we did in the time we lived? And that's the challenge to the church. That's the challenge to those of us that are still active in the social justice movement. And it's always not an easy answer. In my ministry, in my social justice leadership, this is the first generation that had to deal with how do you raise questions of truth to power when the head of state is a black man and the head of the Justice Department is a black man. Dr. King didn't have that challenge. Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Jesse, none of them had that. This is something that we got to figure out, because at one level you want to keep them accountable, at another level you don't want to undercut them and feed them to the adversaries and those that are opposing them. So a lot of times you're into areas and waters that have not been traveled before. That's where faith comes in. And that's where you look and say, well, only God's going to have to show me how to get through this, because there's no book telling us how to deal with this, because it's never happened before. And that's what the church has to do, is not just read the past, but use the lessons of the past in a contemporary, new, and innovative way. And you got to have enough faith to know that if God called you, that God can use you in a different way. There's difference in imitating those in the Bible and in emulating that spirit and being you. So God called David and God called Job and Joshua and all of that, but you got to believe he called you and he knew what he was doing and he was going to do something different.
I learned how to forgive anybody for anything. Usually when I'm teaching on forgiveness, I tell the story about the 2 times I've been spit on in my face. Now you have to understand, I grew up in Richard Pryor day. So I cussed folk going and coming. Do you understand? These people today, they don't even know how to cuss. They don't know what they're doing. But I grew up back in the day where folk knew what they were doing when they cussed you out. So that was kind of, I kind of got, really good at cussing folk out. Well, I remember the first time a girl spit on me. It's my first year in school, in college. Doc, I was so angry and so mad. I was getting ready to kill that girl. My mind just went to really extreme things, but I was a Christian. So, and everybody knew that I was called to be a preacher. And I was like, and I just got so mad, I turned red, I started crying. And I mean, I literally, the whole murder in your heart thing, I was already there, Doc. Well, the second time I was spit on, it was actually a worse. It was just like and just, it was just horrible. That time I didn't get mad at all. Not at all, not even a little bit. And I wish I could tell you it's because I'm so spiritual, and by that time I was just, so full of his power. But let me tell you what it was. It was my grandfather that was my pastor that had a stroke, that was laying in a hospital bed with a trach, and he was sick. So when he coughed, it flew out and hit me. Now, when I tell that story when I'm preaching, people who were like, I know nobody, all of a sudden they go, oh, okay. That's what understanding is. Understanding is when you can say, okay, may have been the same action, but because I understand their state, the action doesn't affect me the same. What I learned from that was, if I can look past my momentary pain to consider what caused them to do what they did. See, it takes somebody sick to make you sick. So I've been able now to look and say, Lord, let me look past what's going on to what caused it in them. And it makes it easy to forgive. When I consider my own sinfulness, and when I consider all that God's forgiven me for, when I look at the fact that there are things that I did I didn't even really mean to do, but He forgave those, then now I can easily offer forgiveness to others. I think that's been a phenomenal lesson learned, because that's kept my heart pure amidst all of the things that people have done.
After my wife had passed away, after the fire, writing a book on relationships, marriage, going around the country doing relationship tours, and with your new wife now, showing the nation what marriage looks like, trying to really focus in on integrity and those kinds of things, and then having a major attack happen, something that you never imagined in a million years happening to you. Having your name dragged through social media, people who have no idea of the facts, no idea, but just, view you and lump you into the whole category of megaphobia is what I call it. And when I was sued, it was one of the most surreal things in my life to watch. When you become breaking news, that's just like, are you kidding me? Seriously? And it was more painful because, again, it was like I was at least 12 years removed from any interaction from the person. At least 12 years. So I was trying to figure out, where is this coming from? And I began to realize, the devil can't attack where you're going. All he has to do is try to attack where you've been. And when I began to see the sensationalism, the fabrications, and you're sitting there with your lawyers and they're like, don't say anything. They kind of sequester you. You're like, oh, but I can prove this isn't true. And they're like, just don't say anything. And then the lawyer is saying one thing, and God is saying, be still. I'm gonna fight this battle for you. And from February to December of 1 year. To watch your name that you worked so hard for 20 years of ministry. God has favored you in the city. All these things, and to watch over a 2-week period, people just stab at you. And people who walk with you and know your heart can believe an accusation without any facts. You know, you start feeling like, is this what Jesus felt like? Is this really it? That you can be falsely accused and people actually say, give us Barabbas. Crucify him, literally. Man, to go through that reveals so much to me about people. It reveals so much to me about the people who connect with our ministries. That everybody you think is with you is not. There's some people, man, that are with you because they want to be attached to you because it makes them look good. There are people who will create a perception that they're praying for you when in fact they're praying for your demise. God was so faithful though. Oh my God, because I found out when you do right, when you've done right and you know you're right, a lie has wings. It may get there quicker, but doggone it don't have no legs. It can't stand. Truth has legs. It may take months to get there, but when it finally does, it stands. December 13th, 2000, when that gavel came down in that courtroom and all of those accusations were dismissed. Didn't have to pay one dime out of my pocket, didn't have to church. We were vindicated completely, just like that. Then it was a blurb in the media. You go from breaking news and accusation, and your vindication is a blurb. It's an unusual thing. And to watch how Christians cannibalize their own. We're the only people. Gandhi said, I'd be a Christian if it wasn't for Christians. It's unbelievable how we crucify our own people. And the devil says, I'll just sit back. I don't have to attack them because I'll just create a scenario and watch them do the work for me. It's unbelievable. But God was so faithful.
My wife was on her way to one of our sister churches one night. My daughter was 2 years old. My son and I were at another church, at another event, and we were scheduled to come back over to meet them at the service that they were going to. My daughter was 2 years old and fell asleep, and her mother was walking across the street from one of the church parking lots to the church across the street with my daughter on her sort of right hip, so to speak, holding her because she had fell asleep. And they were hit by a car that was going down the street. Here in Detroit, oftentimes, street lights are never on. And so the street lights were out, and they were going down the street, and the car hit them. My daughter went up in the air about 15 feet. Her head came through the windshield. She suffered a closed head injury. My wife had about 7 broken bones in her body. And pandemonium sort of took place after that. Everybody came out of the church, blocked the street out. The police came, the EMS came and everything. I was called. I came over from the
church that I was at on another side of town in a panic. My daughter was in a coma for 5 days. Her brain swelled. Doctors gave us all of those ominous predictions about, you know, what she'd be able to do and what she would not be able to do. And after that ordeal, she had to start life all over again, learn how to walk all over again, become potty trained all over again, try to regain her memory all over again. And she struggled academically in those early years. My wife and I, you know, did everything we could. We prayed. We got all kinds of tutoring availabilities and that kind of thing. And so to watch her go across the stage as a, you know, honor roll student, above 3.0 in high school, above 3.0 at Florida A&M University, where she graduated with a degree in business from their prestigious business school. And to see her occupy the job that she has today, I tell you, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And it was one of the defining moments of faith in my life and the life of my wife and I and the life of our family. And it's one of the reasons why our family's very close-knit, because of the things. You know, you're not made by what you have. You're made by what you go through.
I have had moments that I thought what I accomplished was successful. I am not quick to say that I am successful. You can't say that till you're finished, because you can lose it all. I'm not talking about things because I don't really measure success by things. I'm talking about purpose. That's yet to be determined. I've had successful ventures, I've had successful moments, I've accomplished some things that were successful. None of which are things that people would readily know about, because the things that mean the most to me was, for example, taking care of my mother till she died. The things that mean the most to me was watching my twin boys graduate from high school and sending them to college. The things that meant the most to me were not the things you saw on TV or read about in a magazine. They were the simple things. Being there for the people that I really care about, those people things that we all have in common. To me, those are successful things, not these trinkets. They come and go. But what you do for the people you love, that remains. And if everybody thinks you're wonderful and the people you love don't, to me, you're a failure. I don't want to be a public success and a private failure. I don't want to have crowds and crowds of people coming to my funeral weeping because over some message I preached, and the people who live with me not like me. I'd rather have a funeral with 10 people in it who were really crying than to have 10,000 people who were trying to, let me see if I can get his church, let me see if I can get this, let me see if I can get... That's not reality. Reality is much smaller. The new big is small. It's not the big things that we do. It's the little things that we do that nobody would ever know about. It's paying off somebody's mortgage because their husband died. It's little things that never hit the press that you do. If you don't do them, to me, you're not a quality person. And you can't do it for everybody. You can't do it every time. I understand that. But you have to do it enough to be responsible for the level of gifting you got. I believe that I evaluate the quality of a person by how they treat people they think they don't need. I'm not impressed when you treat somebody good that you need. I'm impressed when you help a sky cab, a busboy, a maid, somebody in the street that you think you don't need. And I always look out the corner of my eye in a business meeting to watch how people treat people that they are not doing business with. And it gives me some indication of how you would treat me if you didn't think you needed me.
I grew up very sheltered, but then when I got to Fisk in the 60s, there were riots, there were sit-ins, there were demonstrations. I had never seen the likes of that. I did remember that when I was a child, Dr. King called for bus boycotts. And so we participated in that. I can remember that we didn't ride the bus. I can remember that my mother did not go shopping for Christmas and for Easter one year because we were boycotting. So I had some sense of social consciousness. But when I got to Fisk in the 60s, I got thrust into a movement. And I mean, I loved it. I loved every moment of it. I remember the night that Dr. King was assassinated, April 4th, 1968. I was a sophomore in the dormitory, and they made the girls go in, and the boys, of course, could stay out. And I remember how they, just the unrest and the anger, and how we were hanging out of the window. They wouldn't let us come out of the dorm, but we were just enraged by what had gone on. So that being at Fisk and being in Nashville in the 60s, I think impacted my life forever, because Huey Newton came to our campus, and Angela Davis, and what they put in me, I think, was just a sense of right and wrong, how blacks in America have been mistreated from the very beginning. And I would have to say that it does continue to impact ministry that we do here, because we cannot be just a church that meets on Sunday. We understand the need to move out into the community. We understand the need to preach prophetically. One of the things that I know that preachers are called to do is to comment and give commentary on the times. You can't come to church on a Sunday morning and not reflect on what's going on in the world. We had to talk about Trayvon Martin. We had to talk about our feelings when George Zimmerman was acquitted. We have to talk about what's going on in Chicago and in Jamaica, Queens, with the shootings of, black on black crime. So there's just no way you can be in ministry and be prophetic and not talk about justice and not talk about equality, not comment on the prison system and the inequities there, not comment on stop and frisk and all of the other things that are going on.
We hear that phrase a lot, life is just too short. And when my mom passed away, that became real to me. Life is just too short, to be wasting it over non-important, I don't know if that makes sense. Things that are just not important. Things that have no real value to it. So when my mom slipped away, and it was interesting, my wife and I had been with my mother every week, a couple days at a time. My wife was really, really a blessing to my family, because there were times I couldn't go to the house to see my mom because I just couldn't take it. So my wife would always go. She'd be right there. And when my dad called us and said, she's not breathing right now, and called the ambulance, and they came and got her, and we got up and went to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, she was, they had brought her back, started her heart to be, beating again, but she was not conscious. She didn't regain consciousness at all. The last day it was pretty much heart failure, you know? Pretty much heart failure for her. So I think in the midst of that, a part of me, that church part of me was like, God, I know you're in control, you're able to do it. But, you know, there's that natural side of us that says, you know, oh man, I don't know. I gotta tell you the truth about this. And there are times when there were times when I didn't even know what to pray. There were times when I didn't know what to pray. I didn't know whether to say, God heal her, or just take her. I didn't know what to pray. And you know what's so interesting about that is that when I kissed her, and I think I said goodbye to her then, and this is going to sound real strange, but we talked about heaven, we preached about heaven, but heaven became a reality. Not that it wasn't reality before, but I knew that's where my mother just went. She went to heaven. I don't know how to describe it, man. It was just a different kind of feeling that I had in regards to heaven and God and the Lord.
There was a 16-year-old boy by the name of Carlton Archer in our neighborhood that was murdered in his backyard. And I promised his parents that if they had the funeral here at our church, that we would safeguard them, nothing would happen. Knowing that they were from a different neighborhood, knowing that he was from a different set of kids than the kids who live here. Our church is in gang territories. And for certain kids across certain boundaries can be detrimental. And so I had promised this family, who are faithful members of our church, even when they wanted to have the funeral somewhere else, I promised them, listen, nothing will happen. I said to them, we've had gang funerals, we've had drug dealer funerals, we've had high officials who have had funerals at our church and nothing have happened. And I assure you that nothing is gonna happen. And on the day of the funeral, I was upstairs changing my clothes, and I knew it was going to be packed. It was a sunny day, and there were a lot of kids coming into our area from the other area. And all of a sudden I heard these gunshots, And I could not believe that right in front of the church, gunshots had broke out. And I was devastated and scared. Kids, I got downstairs, people were running and screaming and hollering, and people were in the cars, and finally the police came and we got everything calm, and thank God no one was hurt. But I was broken because I had promised that family that nothing was going to happen, and they had the funeral here at our church on my word. So we finally got everybody into the funeral and got things calmed down, and it was packed, so many young people. And I was able to deliver a message, and a lot of people responded to the call of Christ. And I thought that the funeral was over. But for the first time ever at a funeral, I heard God speak to me in a way that had never happened. And he said to me, there are some individuals here who have guns. Don't leave till you get them. And I thought, nah, this ain't God. This is just me tripping. But I took a step of faith, and I took the mic and I said, listen, there's some people in this church who have brought guns in the church, and God wants me to tell you, if you're gonna diss him like that, he's gonna diss you like that. So here's your options. One, you can turn the guns in now and nothing will be done. Or two, you can go out the doors and suffer the consequences of God. And I said, I'm going to pray. And at the end of this prayer, I want those guns. So I had everybody bow their head, and I said a prayer, and then I said amen, and it was total quiet. No one was saying anything. And so for about a minute, it was just silence. And I thought, I'm going to look stupid. I've embarrassed God. I'm embarrassing myself. And I said, but you know what? I'm just going to believe and trust. And all of a sudden, this brother gives his gun up. Another brother gives his gun up. Another guy gives his gun up. And the fourth gun was a 9mm Glock. And I thought at that very moment, all this time, I've been in this neighborhood and not really having the impact that I need to have. And I said, God, from this moment on, whatever you want me to do, I promise you I'll do it. I don't care how crazy it is. I don't care how strange it is. I'm sold out. I'm committed. And little did I know after that funeral that I would walk out the doors of our church and I would hear that same voice that I knew was telling me that those guns were in the church. And he said to me, go up on the roof of that motel and stay there and don't come down till you raise the money to get it. And I thought, no way. So I said, okay, God, if it's you, I'm gonna do it. So I told my staff, I told my wife, I told my family, everybody thought I was crazy. That was on a Saturday. On Tuesday, I was up on the roof of the motel, and I stayed right there for 94 days on top of a motel in a tent. The motel was abandoned and had previously been a safe haven for drugs and gangs and all kind of crazy activity. And I stayed there for 94 days and I refused to come down. And as a result, national attention was brought to the gun violence. And until this day, a lot of the awareness that we're seeing in Chicago as it relates to gun violence, I believe was birthed on that rooftop experience. And so those experiences, those two experiences, that funeral and being on that roof, have changed my life forevermore. I know that God has a calling on my life to deal directly with gun violence and to deal directly with making sure that young black boys are not killing young black boys, nor are young black boys being killed at the hands of other people as well.
I was about 13 years of age here in Cleveland. Martin Luther King Jr. came to the city in about June, July 1967. People were excited about him And as you know, in 1967, it is after April 4th, 1967, that King gives his Riverside speech in New York City, where he denounces the Vietnam War. And suddenly, those who had been in love with the philosophy of King suddenly became his enemy. And even pastors and churches refused to allow him in their pulpit after the Riverside speech, where even the civil rights organizations refused to embrace him as they did before. President Johnson had dismissed him. Politicians disliked him. And so he comes to the city in about June, July 67. A few people were excited about King, and I was working at the grocery store at that time, and I was asked to go up to the school to hear him at a rally where just a few people attended. It's Rickoff Elementary School that I had attended, and I wanted to be the revolutionary person. I wanted to be the Malcolm X, the nationalist at that time, because I had bought into the philosophy that King had betrayed us with his nonviolent message, and that perhaps Negroes or African Americans needed to be violent and retaliate against injustices in America. So I was going through that stage. They invited me to go there, and I said to an older person, hell no, I won't go. And it was a year later that he was assassinated, as you know. I had a chance to meet Martin King for one time in my life. He was literally a block away, and because I had not interpreted the messages and the times right, I failed to see one of the greatest men of my life. What I did in order to kind of retribute my life and the regrets that I had, I did as I was told at 12 years of age, to go do the best you can, do the right thing. Graduated from school, went to college at Cleveland State, graduated with postgraduate degree, doctorate in African American religious studies, and I became a professor for 15 years. I have been searching out who the real King was. I've been teaching the religious ethics of Malcolm X and Martin King for 15 years. I recently have written a book that hopefully will be released soon, entitled Will the Real King Stand Up?, where I'm lifting up Martin King and Malcolm X and trying to help the reader decide on who had the real and more powerful message. Was it in fact King or Malcolm X? And would King have been a greater leader had he not had the voice of Malcolm X during the time? Would have had greater followers? And so that is, for me, one of my greatest failure, because people have always asked me, what was King like in the 1960s? I can only tell them from what I've read in my research. I can never tell them from firsthand experience.
I've been divorced. And what I learned from that particular aspect of my life is that I didn't understand it. I didn't understand marriage. I didn't understand my responsibilities. I got married young, and I was driven as a minister, and then eventually I became a pastor. And I was already a minister before I got married. And then I allowed ministry to become my master instead of understanding the importance of marriage, that was my first ministry. Didn't understand it. And even to this day, and I failed twice in that area. The first time I got married to young. Second time I got married too quick. But today, both, they're my best friends. We're best friends. No drama, any of that. Because I learned after the test was over. And that has been my thorn in my flesh. That is the part of my life that I truly regret. That didn't work. That I wasn't mature enough to make it work. I get kind of choked up there because I mean that's my Achilles heel. That is the part of my life that keeps me grounded. And now I'm afraid to move in that direction again, even though in my heart I want to, but I'm really waiting on God to do that. And I really want Him to direct me and lead me on this one, because that has been painful. At first I couldn't even talk about it, preach about it, talk about it, but now I can, because again, as I mentioned earlier, that most of the people that I serve, even pastors across this country, have gone through what I've gone through. And so I'm now able to minister to them and to let them know. And again, I offered my resignation to the church because I didn't want to put them through that. And I tell all the ministers who go through this, you might want to do that. Be willing to do that. Be willing to fall on the sword. Because if you move arrogantly through it, then that's going to be a mess. But if you're honest and you're transparent and you're contrite, people will show you the love of God sitting right in those pews. And I never will forget one senior saint said to me, she said, I'm glad you came before us. She said, but don't do that again. I said, why? She said, well, those of us who love you, we don't need an explanation. Those who don't love you, you can explain all day and it's not going to matter.
My mother was my lifeline. She was my support during the early years of my marriage. And just when I became able to, what I would say, pay my mother back, she was diagnosed with cancer, and then cancer of the brain. And I had prayed so hard for God to heal my mother. I remember from October to March of that particular year, missing only one day of visiting her at the hospital. And there was a lot of weight on me because when they wanted to do the biopsy, my mother said, it's up to you, meaning her oldest son. She said, it's up to you. I was my mother's pastor. I was her best friend. Excuse me. And to know that I may lose her was a challenge. So I allowed the biopsy, but my mother never spoke after that. She never said another word. And the cancer had already begun to tear into her body. So during that time, I was trusting God, believing God, and the hospital finally sent her home and said that there's nothing else we could do. And we put a hospital bed in her living room, and the 5 of us suctioned her, we bathed her, we took care of her. And all the time I was praying for a miracle, praying for a miracle. And of course, the miracle of her healing never came. She died. And it was during that part of my life that I was most challenged. I was severely challenged. My faith was challenged. Number one, the enemy told me I could never pray for another sick person. The enemy told me, where was God when you needed him? So all of that was plaguing my mind, and I couldn't get that out of my mind. And I preached my mother's eulogy. My brother and I made a pact that if I would preach her eulogy, he would sing. And I said, well, who else better to preach it? Because I know her better than anybody else. I'm her oldest child. And it was after my mother's funeral, as she'd been buried, that I broke down, and my faith was severely challenged. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to preach. I didn't want to do any of that because I felt God had failed me. I felt God had let me down because my mother was the best person I ever knew in my life. I was sitting at home one Sunday morning. My wife had left, and I'd been out of the pulpit for several weeks, going to the cemetery every day, visiting her grave. And I remember the Sunday morning I sat on the side of my bed and I looked out my bedroom door into the hallway. It was the hall of my home, and I saw a plaque on the wall. I call that the wall in my hall. And there was a plaque there that had been there all the time. You know how you have something in your house and you just pass it and take it for granted? It shot out at me. And in the midst of the most severe depression that I'd ever had, I looked at the sign, I looked at the plaque, and I read it. And it said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I said, what does that mean? God grant me the serenity. What is serenity? I ran and got a dictionary, and I discovered that serenity means inner peace and inner calmness, a tranquility of the mind and the spirit.
This child was born with a skin disorder. It was called epidermolysis bullosa, and very rare. I mean, 1 in so many millions, whatever, and not really prevalent in the African American community. But our daughter, here it is. I can't fuss at my wife. She cannot fuss at me because, I mean, not that we really contributed to this. Nobody was drinking, nobody was smoking, nobody was doing drugs during pregnancy. You know, it just happened, and it's a 1 in a million chances of it happening. So we can't look at each other, and we can't, because somebody got to be at fault for this. You got to blame somebody, but there's nobody to blame. So it really caused us to look at the Lord and to focus on God for an answer. You know, okay, what is this about? Okay, well, she's going to be the 1 out of the million that's going to survive this thing. She had dystrophic, it was of a dystrophic nature with her, so she was not supposed to survive 3 months. Needless to say, 11 and a half months, it was a roller coaster. There were times when our faith was sky high, and then there were times when we were just in the valley of discouragement. She was born with open wounds on her body, on her legs, on her arms, on her hands. You know, they would scab up, then other blisters would form. Her body couldn't take any friction, any rubbing. We had to carry her on kind of a foamed apparatus because, again, just her being on your arms, you know, that friction would cause blisters. 11 and a half months of that, it was a rough time. I mean, you're talking about receiving prophecies, you're talking about the world praying, interceding, fasting, that this Ellis baby is going to make it, be the 1 in a million. And, you know, there were times when it looked like, you know, she was going to be that 1 in a million. And then,
your faith will be challenged, because just when you thought, okay, no more blisters, 2 weeks later, here's a blister growing, and you have to let it take its course, then you have to lance it, then you have to drain it, then you have to bandage her up and change these bandages every day and put ointment on her bodies. It was a rough time. And if it was a rough time for me and my wife, just think about the poor baby, who probably gained a tolerance for pain because it's all she ever knew. I will say this, when she made her transition, May 25th, 1994, she was born June 13th, 1993. It was the best of times and the worst of times at the same time. Hated going to that hospital when she would have to have blood transfusions. But when she made her transition at that hospital, for the first time, I got to hold my baby without that foam carton, because there's no life. I could squeeze her as much as I wanted to. I could hold her without something in between her and my flesh. I remember standing outside of that hospital, Beaumont Hospital, on that Wednesday afternoon. And I looked back at the hospital and I said, man, I've hated coming to this place to see my baby. But now, I'm never coming here again to see her. And it was the best of times, because no more blood transfusions, no more bandages, no more crying when you have to unwrap these bandages and then put some more ointment on. And by this time, it was all over her body. I mean, torsos, you name it. We were almost wrapping her like a mummy. And the best of time, because that's over with. No unwrapping and skin pulling. But the worst of times, because, at the end of the day, that's your baby. And, what would she have been, with my brother, with my son, how different would he be having a little sister to protect? What would she be in life, What's her destiny, I can afford to put her in college for her to be whatever she wanted to be. And it gets back to that plan of God and the will of God, What was that all about, And the lesson that I learned, Lord, let me learn it. Whatever you're trying to say to me and tell me, because that's too painful to ever go through again.
Did you learn the lesson? Or was there, do you understand it?
I'm not sure that I learned the lesson, other than there are some things about God that you just have to trust. And your service to Him is not predicated on Him explaining Himself.
I was in seminary, and I wanted to go to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. It was the largest seminary in the world. And my family didn't have much money. I had graduated from college. And so I went, and I was accepted in that school, but I needed housing for the dorm. I needed the school to give me housing. And I went to the financial office, and they explained to me that yes, indeed, you were accepted, but we don't have any housing at this time, that we will put your name on a waiting list. And I was about 400 on the waiting list. And they said, however, we can give you references for apartments. So I called my dad and I said, hey, they don't have housing. They'll give me references for apartments. He said, son, you might as well pack up and come home. Your mother and I cannot afford to give you an apartment. That weekend, I went to Dallas, And Dallas is where I had gone to undergrad. And I spent the weekend in Dallas, and I went to my home church like I always did. And that Monday, I came back to the campus, and I decided, since I was 400th on the waiting list, I decided to go back by that office to see if I had been moved to 399. So just to check the progress. So I walked in and I said, I'm James Meeks. And they said, you're James Meeks? I said, well, yes. They said, oh, we didn't have a phone number for you. We've been looking all over for you. They said, I said, well, what's the big deal? They said, we don't have any minorities in the dorm, not one. And we receive federal funds from the state government, from the federal government. And by law, we have to put minorities in our dorm. And we moved you up to number 1 on the waiting list. Matter of fact, we have a room for you. And it was like, whoa, God, can you do things like this? How do you move from 400 to number 1? Well, you do it by really being the only black at the school. The school was like 4,000 and something whites. It was 30 of us African Americans. But that was just another way of God showing me his miraculous hand, that if he really wants you at a place and he really wants to show you that he's in your corner, he really can. And that showed me, man, God can do some miraculous things. So that was another situation in my life that really has helped me to be comfortable, even in a situation that looks like it's a disappointment or a setback. Just wait a weekend, give God a chance to work it out. On Monday, he'll have it fixed.
Chilling at the crib, thinking about what he's done for me. All the good times, the bad, and the laughs. Every circumstance in my life fills my mental capacity. My mind needs church, but unlike David, I'm not glad. Underground emotions rule my thoughts, but I still pray. I remember being taught one day everything will be okay. The pressure builds and anxiety gets the best of me. But the place